Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the monthly Financial Security for All Community of Practice webinar. Our topic for this month is heirs property. Heirs property occurs when property passes to family members without a legally designated owner. And so the heirs own the property without clear title. And that can even happen for successive generations. So that with each generation, without a clear title, all the potential heirs are joint owners in the property. So it can make it difficult for individuals to accumulate wealth or make decisions about the use of the property. So we're here to understand more about this topic and how we can help serve our clientele who may be having issues with heirs property, as I know many of us teach estate planning and farm family resilience, and those are topics that can be pertinent to both of those issues. We're really happy to have with us today our own Dr. Becky Smith. Becky is an assistant professor at Mississippi State University, and she also directs the MSU Extension Center for Economic Education and Financial Literacy. We're also joined by Fran Miller today, and they're going to tell us more about the role of extension in improving wealth of heirs property owners. So thanks so much for being here, and we'll turn it over to Dr. Becky Smith.
Thank you very much, Laura. You did a great job previewing what we're going to talk about today. Great to have everybody this afternoon, and we're excited to be able to be with you today to talk about this topic of heirs property, which is I'm fairly new to, and to be able to see that. But have with me today Fran Miller from the University of Vermont Law School. So hopefully together we'll be able to increase our understanding here. Let's see if I can advance here. But at this point, we're going to start today with a question. How much do you know about heirs property just, at this point in time? So nothing at all, maybe a little bit or quite a bit, or like you are an expert, you could give a workshop on it. And so I'm Becky Smith from Mississippi State University Extension. I'm in the Community Economic Development and also serve as the Family Resource Management. I run the Center for Economic Education and Financial Literacy. And everything I really do is about increasing assets for individuals and families and firms. And so the topic of heirs property fits right there in the center. We also, like I said, have Fran, and she's going to do the second part of the webinar today. And so our goals, our objectives here is that after the webinar, you're going to have an improved understanding of heirs property. Maybe we can shift you up one. So we're going to talk about what it is, why it's a problem, and what extension educators can do, and where to find additional resources and how to get connected. Hopefully that sounds good. At the heart of the issue, heirs property is about a lack of clarity on ownership, is what Laura talked about a second ago. That's really the issue of the matter. So the term heirs property occurs when property passes to multiple family members without a legally designated owner. So kind of the key word there might be multiple. And so each owner has an interest in the entire asset rather than each heir having their own piece of the asset. Now, this can happen even if there is a will. So that's a common misunderstanding, is that wills will clear up everything. But even if there is a will, sometimes the deed is still typically in the name of that deceased relative. And so that still prevents the problem still exists. You hear the terms fractured, tangled, or clouded around when you talk about the title of the deed. So when you're there's a lot of new terms that I've had to learn, and I'm still trying to sort them out, but those are some of them. And so the heirs own the property without what they call clear title. So a lot of legal aspects to this issue. And so that is going to restrict people from being able to use the asset to accumulate wealth, which is a significant problem in and of itself. And in addition, we've seen a lot of land loss to particular groups, specifically African American landholders in the South. But it also impacts white communities in Appalachia, Latinx communities in the Southwest, and indigenous communities living on reservations. And the issue gets very complicated very quickly because different states have different rules on heirs and how that all works. So, for example, I'm going to give you an example of how heirs property can happen. Again, this is an example from the Georgia Heirs Property Law Center that I was able to get, and I thought, oh, this is really helpful. So I'm going to give it to you today. But this is in how it would work in Georgia. So it might not work in your state like this. So say that mom owns a home and dies. Okay, so she survived by her husband and 6 children. And so in Georgia, it would go without a will, it would go to the spouse and the children. Again, it may not work like that in your state. But you can see they've got 7 heirs to this house. So that can create a lot of confusion. I'm going to talk about in a minute. But over on the right-hand side, the second example, let's say mom has that same house, but this time she's lost 2 of her children already, but they each have children. And so she dies without a will. And then in Georgia, the property then is now co-owned by 11 heirs. So you can see that this can, the amount of heirs can add up really quickly. And so each heir has equal rights to full use and possession. Each heir is legally responsible for taxes and other property-related expenses. And each heir can transfer by either gift or sale their interest to another heir or non-heir. Each heir can seek a partition of the property or a breaking up of the property. And each heir must agree to any major decisions about the property. So you can see that when a property is owned in an heirs property situation, there's a lot of conflict that can happen. There's a lot of things that can get in the way of being able to use this land to create wealth. So specifically, when one has clear title, then you can do a lot with your property, right? Because our whole system is basically based on contracts. And we want to know what entity we are engaging in business with. So these are things you can do when you have clear title, and you can't do if you don't have clear title, right? So clear title allows people to open lines of credit, apply for a mortgage, can be used as collateral for a loan to improve property. So even to send, your kids to college, to be able to lease your land and profit that way. And even selling your natural resources. So for example, like selling timber. So you need to have clear title to be able to engage in these transactions. So you got to have a clear title to get a farm number, to be able to participate in many government and state programs. There has been a bit of a softening on this and a movement here, but having a clear title is really, really important to be able to participate. in a lot of our government programs. What you can sell the property or you can keep the property. And so the question of how prevalent is heirs property is a really important question, which is a really hard thing to figure out. So there's, because every state and every county compiles the real estate ownership data differently. And so it is very, very difficult to comb through all of the different codes that different localities use. So it's not an easy thing to be able to just say, oh, this is how much heirs property that we have. So right now, there are a lot of people really trying to get resources together to be able to figure this out. In the South, they've done a little bit of research, so I was able to get my hands on this for you. And you can see this is on the left. The Forest Service is doing a lot of work around trying to figure out the extent of where do we have heirs property. And then on the right, you can, this is data that was proprietary. So they were able to do that. So you can kind of see that there's a lot of heirs property being around everywhere. Clearly the date on the right, Mississippi it has a lot of heirs property. Now, one of the projects I'm going to talk about that we're working on is trying to get all of this data together nationally as well. But the impact of heirs property is significant in preventing people from being able to gain wealth, like we were saying. So there's a hypothesis that there is causation between heirs property and persistent poverty, and we're trying to be able to run models and figure out to look at that. So it's been shown already to be statistically significant in the South. So you can kind of see that where there's heirs property, there is a lot of persistent poverty. So, but that is an issue that is still to be unpacked. One of the problems that we run into is a lack of trust of African Americans in the system, and even trusting to go to lawyers. This is a really important quote from W.E.B. Du Bois that I thought I would share with you. Some of us don't have that background and would never even think, because we kind of grow up thinking, oh, the legal system is for us. But the Negro is coming more and more to look upon law and justice not as protecting safeguards, but as sources of humiliation and oppression. The laws are made by men who have little interest in him. They are executed by men who have absolutely no motive for treating the Black people with courtesy or consideration. And finally, the accused lawbreaker is tried not by his peers, but too often by men who would rather punish 10 innocent Negroes than let one guilty one escape. So you can see that there's a lot of complexity with this issue, and trying to be able to solve it is difficult. But you can see that heirs property is one reason why we've seen a lot of land loss in the amongst Black landowners. Here's a quick graph of the what's happened to Black farm ownership since 1910. Here is a more recent example of some of the problems that have resulted. So predominantly, funding from USDA, for example, has been focused on white families. So there's a lot of issues there to go through. We're not going to dig into those here at this time, but just to say that this is a reason why we have this African American community, for example, has been prevented from being able to create wealth through this asset. So who operates in this space? Basically, from what as I'm trying to figure it out, We have educators and technical assistance organizations. So people that help people recognize the problem, can refer people to the technical assistance, and then also educating on how to build wealth from your asset. Their lawyers operate in this space, so determining what the next steps are, how that asset should be held, also helping those landowners clear title, and then also doing estate planning. And then, of course, there's researchers in this space as well. There's a lot of organizations in the heirs property space. More and more attention is being paid to it now. But I went ahead and put a few of the big name ones on this slide. You're going to get some more resources in just a minute. So barriers, and I'm trying to build up to the question, like, how can extension, where is extension's role? So trying to understand where are the needs, and then how can we go about helping landowners. So barriers that landowners face is understanding the issue, knowing where to get help, and the cost of clearing title. Extension educators and other community educators, just again, understanding the issue, and then knowing how to support organizations that are already working in this area, and how can we help them do their mission, and knowing how to support families. So I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Policymakers and elected officials, also many don't understand that issue and its impact on their local, their location and their constituents, and also don't know where to go to get help to learn about policies. The legal industry, many attorneys I've talked to kind of casually have never heard of it. So even in the legal industry, there's a lack of knowledge. There is a need to have resources to help clients in many, many ways. And we don't have enough African-American lawyers, which is really needed, so that people can build trust and have trust with that community, those landowners. So what can be done in it? In my brain, it goes two ways. We can help those who currently have heirs property to determine the next steps, and we can refer, and we can then prevent. So those are the two avenues essentially that we have, that can be done with the problem of heirs property. So preventing heirs property looks like estate planning, directing how property should be distributed. Single beneficiary. So again, even if you have a will and you leave it to everybody, then you still have the problem. So selling the property and dividing proceeds, heirs get options to purchase the property, and then dividing among beneficiaries. So all of those are complexities that you got to address. So what is extension's role then? If those are the things that we can do, and those are the players that are in this realm, from what I can tell, there are three main things. We can help others understand the issue. We can help families find the help that they need, and we can support organizations that are providing education and technical assistance. I put keep calm and stay in your lane, because so much of this really is that the attorney is the one that's going to really help that family. So we need to stay in our lane and not be providing legal advice, right? So that's really, really important. So one of the things that I'm working on, because I got to be part of a grant, which I'll talk about in a second, but is a curriculum for education for extension educators and community educators. And so right now we know that the elements need to be understanding the issue within its historical context, being able to have skills to work with landowners effectively. And so that means that we got to have the cultural competency. The extension educators can serve as mediators and help families help them understand what it is they need to do to have those succession conversations. We can help families prepare to see an attorney so that when they get there, they can reduce their costs. We can support organizations that provide technical assistance by locating them, by developing relationships with them, by referring and hosting workshops in conjunction with them. So Ayers Property, the Southern Rural Development Center has done a lot of work in this space and trying to build the network. So as well as the research. So highlighting that. And then right now we're working on a 3-year project that is doing, again, trying to figure out the relationship between Ayers Property and persistent poverty and the racial wealth gap. And then investigate those outcomes to resolving Ayers Property ownership, and then developing and implementing that education curriculum. So Sandra Thompson is an extension specialist at FAMU. So she gave a presentation at one of the boot camps that I went to try to learn about it. And she's really the leader within extension doing this work. And so she really should be the one here presenting. Wanted to give her just a little bit of an opportunity to share just what she has done. And so we're going to share this video that they produced, and it also will give you an example of what extension can do in this space.
Hi, my name is Sandra Thompson. I am the Community Resource Development Program Leader at Florida A&M University in the Corporate Extension Program. Nice to meet you. Family heir property is property that occurs when a person dies and does not have a will, but has children or other relatives. It also occurs when a person has a will, but does not identify who the heirs are. Or if a person has a will, identifies the heirs, but doesn't say which piece of the property they own. What that means is they all own the property collectively. Cloudy title. Family heir property is a problem for a lot of people because it creates economic, harmful vulnerabilities. What I mean by that is that property is used for collateral and other purposes in the U.S. However, when you have a cloudy title, banks, other financial institutions, even the federal government will not provide assistance because the title is unclear. Additionally, taxes often aren't paid. Properties are often stolen because there are so many heirs. So essentially, those vulnerabilities make it very difficult for intergenerational transfer of wealth to occur for heir property. Family heir property creates harmful economic vulnerabilities for owners. The reason is because the property is not usable as collateral. The title is cloudy. Everyone owns the title. So therefore, a bank or any other financial institution will not accept it. Also, USDA and other federal programs will also not use heir property as a form of collateral. Wealth building is created through clear title property transfer. If you have family heir property, you need to clear title. You can go to your local county growth management office, and they have a process that you can complete, and they will give you the directions on navigating it. You can also merge titles into a corporation, limited liability company, or a trust. You can also contact Florida A&M University's Corporate Extension Program, and we will be happy to help you. There are a few tips to success if you choose to clear title to your family heir property. The first thing that you need to do is to do a family tree. Family tree would include stepchildren, adopted children, divorced individuals, anyone that's connected to the family. Then you need to identify 1 to 2 people who can help navigate the process, individuals within your family. Then you need to go to your county growth management office and begin the application process to clear title to your property. Once you've done that, you will begin to identify different areas that need to be addressed. An engineer, a surveyor. When you select your engineer, ensure they give you one price for the services. Once you select your surveyor, ensure that they put permanent markers that you can easily identify. Those are some clear tips to success.
Okay, so I thought that was just a really great way to review as well as explain what it also is a great example of what an extension educator can do. And then we're going to kind of stop and take a breath and just ask you kind of what have you learned so far? We're asking you to put answers in the chat. And we're going to transition then to Fran's part of the presentation. So what are the most important things that you have learned so far about the issue of heirs property? And Laura is going to share that with us. So we want to make sure that you guys are still awake and engaged and giving us feedback on what we might need to be more clear about.
Thanks, Becky. So we have the chat available now. So if you just put in what is something important that you've learned so far. Marcia, how different intestate succession laws are in the South compared to Montana. So things are different. Yes, and I think that's one of the things we talk about is to check what the laws are. I know in Arkansas, someone who's married, 1/3 goes to the surviving spouse and 2/3 are divided equally among the surviving children. Brenda said the definition of heirs property and how a clouded title can cause family issues and even loss of the property. Thanks, Brenda. And when I've taught estate planning seminars, I've known that issue has come up a few times, and we were glad to identify it for those people. But I hadn't thought about the repercussions on some farm loans and other things that people might be trying to do with property. The need to identify a single person as an heir of property. That heir property can be an issue even if you have a will.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, very good.
The concept of growth management office is interesting. And I'm not sure, that's from one of our Arkansas Extension educators. I'm not sure we have a growth management office in Arkansas, but I will circle back around with them later and we'll find out.
Yeah, I imagine it's called something different everywhere. So the process works differently everywhere, which is something Fran is an expert in. So the Vermont Law Center has done some amazing work in helping us help people to figure out what is the different laws in the different places. And so, Fran, we're going to send it over to you to take us home here.
All righty. Thanks, Becky. Hi, everyone. I'm Fran Miller. I'm a staff attorney at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems, which is at Vermont Law School. By the way, no connection to University of Vermont, except that we're in the same small state. So I just want to do a real quick intro of the Center for Ag and Food Systems. We train law and policy students in food and ag policy. We teach classes in the field. Experientially, our students partner with organizations like Mississippi State and maybe others to develop free legal resources for policymakers, farmers, consumers, and other stakeholders in the food system. Just to give a quick sense of the breadth of what we do, and these resources might be helpful to you as well. The Farmland Access Legal Toolkit I'm going to talk more about in a bit. It helps farmers and landowners save money by explaining legal concepts around leasing and land access and transferring land so that you can educate yourself before you go to a lawyer and have to spend less legal fees. The Extension Legal Services Initiative, we've created resources for food producers that answer legal questions that can arise in the course of their operations, particularly around FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act. And then the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit includes legal resources and best practice recommendations, case studies for farmers market leaders. So to this subject at hand, which of course is heirs property, we've been working on this issue as part of expanding this toolkit. And I'm going to talk today about the legal issues that arise for landowners. Becky's touched on a lot of what I'm going to talk about, but I might be a little repetitive, but I don't think it hurts. I think it's a really complicated topic. And so let's just get right back into it. We are in the process of creating materials that support families owning heirs property, and they are state-based fact sheets. As Becky and Laura both mentioned, each state has different laws on all of these issues that face heirs property owners. Some of them are similar, but they are often different. And depending on what state you're in, it will differ how you can help people and educate people. So these are the issues that we're going to talk about. Who are the heirs, partition law, tax sales, tax savings, adverse possession. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some legal changes that stem from the Farm Bill and FEMA. So first, I thought it would be helpful to talk about this glossary that we've created. And again, some of this will be repetitive, but heirs are people who are entitled under the state laws of intestate succession to inherit property. And intestate succession, as it seems some of you know, because I think you've used the term in your questions, these are the state laws that govern who inherits the property from somebody who dies without a will. And these are the laws that really differ per state. And then clearing title is at the bottom. And what that means, and Becky's been using this phrase a lot, it's just the legal process of proving who the current owners are. So again, Becky went over this a bit, but who are the heirs? The most important thing that heirs property owners have to do is trace the ownership of the land from the original ancestor to the current owners. And building a family tree is really critical here. And it should include birth and death dates of everyone that they could find, county of death, and any current contact information. And there's resources out there that help heirs. There's genealogists, there's family history sites like Ancestry.com, MyHeritage.com, FamilySearch.org. Family Bibles can also be a really good source of information and can sometimes be used as evidence to show heirs. And then again, as Becky mentioned, each state has different land offices. So sometimes it's called property appraiser's office, and you can go there to trace land ownership, but it really differs in each state. There is a government office, though, in every state that holds land records and death records. So again, who are the heirs? This chart shows Florida law, which is different than Georgia law. So for example, if a person dies with a spouse and children, the spouse inherits everything, as opposed to in Georgia where the spouse got half and the kids, or the spouse and the kids shared everything. So it's really important to know both that each state is different, and there's a lot of categories of things to look at. So partition law, Becky mentioned partition. So heirs inherit land from someone who didn't have a will, right? And they own the land as tenants in common. Somebody asked a question earlier, what's the difference between heirs property and tenants in common? Heirs Property describes how you own the land. Tenants in common are the heirs. That is what they are called. And as Becky said, when the heirs own the property as tenants in common, each heir owns an undivided interest in the land. As Sandra said in her video, they own it collectively. They don't own any specific piece of the land. And so any of those tenants in common as co-owners can bring a lawsuit in court for what's called a partition of the property, so that that specific shareholder can get the value of their interest in the property. And this is one of the things that has led to really significant land loss for heirs property owners. As you saw in the video from Vice, we didn't see the whole thing, but some real estate speculator, most likely, somehow convinced one of the heirs that owned an interest to sell the speculator their interest. And then that speculator went to court and asked a court to sell the property. When they do that, depending on what state they're in, the court orders a sale, and that often results in the property being sold at auction and the family members getting pennies on the dollar for what the land is worth. So this is a reform that has been passed really significantly in 19 states. So you can see the list here and see where you are. In these states, the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act was passed, and what it does is it provides strong procedural rights to landowners. So in a partition action, the court has to allow other co-owners the right to buy out the shareholder who brought the action. In the states where this isn't passed, that is not the case, and they have to bid in the same way that everybody else does in order to get the land. This law also requires the court to try to divide up the property physically rather than sell it. You know, this is family land for people, especially African Americans whose ancestor acquired the land in the early 1900s after slavery. It's meaningful. And in states where this law is not passed, the court does not have to take into account the meaning of the land to people when they do the sale. And then finally, the sale has to be at market value. It's not at auction. And the law sets forth a whole process for the property to be appraised and sold. Another way that heirs property owners lose their land is through property tax sales. So anybody who owns property knows that taxes have to get paid or else it can get taken away from you. It's also important for heirs property owners to know it doesn't mean you own the property if you've been paying the taxes. And it doesn't mean that your interest in the property is any bigger than anyone else's. You are entitled to reimbursement from your co-owners, but that is all. If nobody pays the taxes and the county takes it, the owners get nothing from the sale of the property. Generally, this is a state law issue also, but in most states, that is the case. One thing to know is that every state has a different method for selling the property, but most states do have the right of redemption, which means that the original owner can redeem the property within a certain time period by paying the taxes that are owed, and there's significant penalties, but it is possible to get it back. Yes, property tax savings. Many states across the country have agricultural exemptions for property tax. It's called different things in different states. In New York and in Vermont, the two places that I practice law, it's called current use. So if the land is being used for agriculture, there's a discount on property taxes due. And every state has its own definition of agricultural use. Some have, there's got to be a minimum number of acres in use, and some have that you have to be generating a certain amount of income. But different states have different rules. And it's important for heirs property owners to know this because it is a way they can save some money on their taxes. Adverse possession and condemnation. So these are legal terms. basically, heirs property owners have to manage and monitor their land, or it can be essentially taken by trespassers under adverse possession or taken by the government under condemnation. Generally, most states allow a trespasser to become owner of land they don't own if certain criteria are met, such as occupying the land openly and visibly in a way that's clear that they're acting as if they're owning it, and doing that for at least a minimum amount of years, maybe 7 years, 10 years, it depends on the state. And then condemnation is another word for eminent domain. And that's when the city, the state, the feds, or a public agency even, or private companies sometimes are allowed to do this, energy companies, for example. They have to show that taking the land is necessary for a public purpose. And it's just really easy for people who don't live on the land, and heirs property owners often don't, to know what's going on. And they may not even live in the state where the land is located. And that's dangerous. They need to keep track. So a couple of issues here. In the Farm Bill of 2018, Becky had mentioned that one of the problems owning heirs property is that you can't get a farm number. This changed in 2018, or it changed more recently. They just literally issued guidance, the FSA, and that there is a link there to a fact sheet, which does authorize different documents than title. So heirs property owners now are entitled to get a farm number. And that is a really important point that not a lot of people know, especially those who aren't even dealing with FSA. So I think that's a really important point for extension folks to know. Then the heirs property relending program, this was just, rules were just issued for this program. Again, there's a link there. This is providing, USDA is lending money to community development financial institutions, CDFIs, and they are lending money to heirs property owners to resolve title issues. And this is just happening right now. I think the end of October is when the CDFIs have to have applied to USDA to be approved to be lenders. So still to be determined exactly how this is going to work, but they did just issue rules and it is in process. And it is a way to get a loan to resolve your title issues. And then very recently, FEMA expanded eligibility criteria for disaster relief. And they have now issued rules. And again, that's a link to a press release by FEMA that lays out what those rules are so that heirs property owners can show that they own the property without title. So I want to talk a little bit about how to prevent heirs property. I know that some on the call here do estate planning education, and y'all probably know more than I do about it. So I'm not going to get too deep. It is really critical here. Just briefly, why is so much African-American land owned as heirs property? Well, a huge number of people in America don't have wills or other estate plans. And studies show the rate of intestacy is between 40 and 70%, depending on factors like race and income level. And there's also a significant racial disparity between who has a will and who doesn't. Even the most highly educated African Americans who were surveyed here had much lower rates than the least educated white respondents. And just a quick note, at the end of the Civil War and beyond, as Du Bois said, African Americans had little access to trustworthy attorneys or even to basic information about estate planning and legal information about land and inheritance and what you had to do to meet the requirements. Nor could they trust the legal system that did not protect them and, in fact, colluded to harm them. So often, people intentionally did not leave a will, which would have to be probated through the legal system. So our poll here is, Samantha has put it up. Please answer. True, false, depends. Well, depends has it, and that is the right answer. One thing that Becky said earlier that I just want to clarify, and Sandra said this too in her video. So making a will can prevent heirs property if you designate which piece of property your heirs are to receive. If you just say, my 3 kids get my property or share the land, that creates heirs property. You have to specifically say the boundaries of which property each kid gets, or figure out some other way to prevent leaving it to them as tenants in common. You can leave it to them. This is going to kind of get in the weeds on the legal side, but there's something called right of survivorship, so that if one of the kids dies, their interest goes to the 2 kids that are living. So there is a way to prevent leaving it to them as tenants in common, and that's the way to prevent heirs property. So just succession planning is so critical. I think really key to this is that there have to be trusted advisors to the African-American community. Becky pointed out extension needing to do some cultural competency and that sort of thing. I think there is just so much mistrust that has been generated and fear in the African-American community around losing land. I don't even know that people actually say, I have heirs property. I think it's people keep it hidden because they're afraid that their land is going to get stolen. So people will call it family land sometimes, but I think it's not necessarily clear when somebody has heirs property. And we do, just another point is that we have some resources on our toolkit, on our Farmland Access Legal Toolkit on wills and trusts. So Becky alluded to this. This is a list that we have in formation of organizations that are providing direct assistance to heirs property owners. I don't have these broken down by state, which I think would be really helpful to this audience, and we can work on that. This is a list that's part of the toolkit, and I can promise that we'll break it down by state because I think that would be really important. And if you come across additional organizations, please let us know because we would love to add them to our list. And then this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you have legal questions. I cannot give legal advice, but I'm happy to provide referrals.